some kind of SAS types, if you know what I mean, whilst always telling them that they're useless. And I remember they are approached by some group, and they happen to have a female among the group. And he just stops dead and looks at her as though he's kind of looking at an alien from outer space with the infamous line, "You're a woman." So what can I say? Oh, I see we have already gone live again.
Of course.
Oh dear, we've gone in media res.
We've gone in what?
In media res, in the middle of things.
Oh, yes, of course. Well,
no, there's
AA
another
likes
word,
to do
there's
that on his
another
own
word for it,
podcast.
Callum. It's called betrayal.
betrayal. the
Why do you
accented
expect anything
betrayal. The reason that I brought live is, one, because I did not wish the chat to miss out on another glorious anecdote.
Well, it turned out not to be so glorious.
Well,
because it just induced painful silence. Yes.
It just induced painful silence. But secondly, it's gone 8 o'clock, and I'm conscious that I don't want to keep people waiting. But yes, so looks like we're picking up. We have 20 viewers already, so that's pretty good stuff. I'm going to introduce. I have 2 new guests this evening. Obviously, there is myself, not so obvious, also known as Mark, the Britisher this evening.
Good evening.
I have Will Simpson, who is the community organizer for the Liberalists UK.
Hello, everyone. And
I have Callum Ferguson of political renown on Academic Agents channel.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure. No doubt you'll all have seen the news today of Bojo's resignation in the wake of Davis's resignation and now Steve Baker's resignation.
No, Steve Baker resigned with David Davis last night.
Yes, but I believe Chris Green has also resigned since.
In the last 15 minutes.
Yes, he was some kind of permanent parliamentary secretary.
Well, did we
parliamentary private secretary to the Secretary of State for Transport.
Yeah, there you go.
Did we talk about this, like, as in we were expecting a wave of mass resignations?
What it was is the BBC is operating on the assumption, I think, that one resignation is triggering another and another as the Prime Minister reacts to the previous one.
Yes, but myself, the British academic agent, I don't know if there were more actually. We met probably Yaka Shinobi, met to discuss the Chequers Agreement in general, and we were surprised by the lack thereof resignations accompanying it. And it seems like they've been assessing the water and then going for it, perhaps just composing the letters, I suppose.
Well, there is one theory that suggests that it may have been David Davis that did that, and Boris Johnson then basically felt he had no other option but to do so, because otherwise he would lose the mantle of the leader of the Brexit party effectively to David Davis.
Mm. Yeah. Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because people seem to be going around. Has anyone listened to Farage's broadcast on LBC for the last hour?
I tried, but I couldn't get it from my connection. It was fading in and out. I think Farage was phoning in anyway.
Yeah, Farage was in a different studio, and they had to cut him off halfway through the show, and next one started early, so I just couldn't get it working.
I did hear the first half an hour, but my connection seemed to be okay. But he when he was taking calls from people, he tended to fizzle out a bit.
Yeah.
But he basically said as well that I was a little disappointed in his response, to be perfectly honest, because he just said, if Brexit doesn't get on track, I may consider.
No, when he said may consider, he has basically said he will.
Yes.
Yeah.
Academic Agent says Farage was being strangled by MI5 at the same time.
What was the other thing I was going to say? Did anyone else watch the BBC News special at 6:30?
No. Elucidate?
It was essentially the BBC summarising what had happened and analysing what was going to happen. And they pretty much predicted that this, just because the Prime Minister has survived, doesn't mean that she's going to continue, and that resignations will start to mount up.
Yes, we are expecting that.
I'm
what-
on Twitter watch.
You're on Twitter because we were expecting, because we were talking about the fact that the 48 letters required had not been received, because there was a lot of conflicting information on that.
I think I can confirm a 5th resignation.
A fifth, who is it?
Conor Burns, MP, Parliamentary Private Secretary to Boris Johnson, or former
Principal
Parliamentary
Private Secretary.
Principal Private Secretary. Right. So I think, I can't tell. He hasn't announced an official resignation, but it's being touted by Guido Fawkes as a 5th resignation, coming just half an hour after the last one.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me.
This is turning into a Labour
Yes,
front bench.
this is another person basically sort of, in the entourage of Boris Johnson, by the sound of it.
Indeed.
So just Baker was in the entourage of David Davis.
Yes.
So it's not as if these are big beasts of their own.
No, but
I think the one thing I heard that I thought was significant was Michael Heseltine on the BBC saying that as far as he was concerned, he thought the Chequers deal was dead. And you have to consider that this is a pro-Euro grandee of the Tory party coming out and saying the Chequers
The man
deal is
who
dead.
killed Thatcher.
So you can't help but feel that, yes, this is something significant. That basically, if someone of his stature comes out, and someone who clearly doesn't share the political goals of Heseltine and Davis, and he says this is dead in the water, then I think we can basically take it as read that this more than likely is dead in the water now.
Quite potentially.
Effectively, Theresa May's fate rests with this deal. If this deal cannot continue on, then given that she's basically nailed her colours to the mast, you can't really see how she could possibly go on if the one thing that she has basically said, this is what we're going to do, is then rejected.
What was it? Brexit means Brexit. And you're just going, God, this clearly doesn't mean Brexit. But there's also the fact that there's the ERG meeting tonight, which has over 80 members confirmed attending now.
Yeah, confirmed by 2 sources, the BBC and the Telegraph.
I mean, when
also, there's rumours of Fox resigning.
Because
Fox
looks he's very strongly a Brexiteer again.
Did anyone watch him on Parliament this morning or this afternoon when the Prime Minister was making her speech? They kept, whenever they mentioned trade, they kept cutting back to him, and he looked grim.
Oh, really? Just really.
I think he was weighing up. Gove is not going to resign. I mean, I might be shocked he might, but it looks like Gove isn't going to resign because he seems
Gove came out basically defending the deal. So he would really now be in a difficult position to resign over it. He was over the weekend coming out on the media defending the deal. So that basically means he is now definitely in the I support this camp.
Well, he has a kind of mentality of he's made his bed, and now unless he sleeps in it, he's going to basically kill his own career. Although sleeping in this bed will.
Well, I mean, I think he more than likely killed his career as such when he basically sabotaged Boris.
It could be that he's gunning for Foreign Secretary, hoping that by remaining in the party he can stop. What I'm trying to say is, I think what Gove might be doing is he's gunning for Foreign Secretary so he can get promoted up to a high office, so that if the government does survive, he's perfect in position to move in as an interim leader to replace me.
Given that he doesn't have a support base anymore now, I really am doubtful that he would have any chance in any future leadership bid.
But do you think Gove realises that?
I think Gove is just pure sleaze, so it's kind of difficult to tell what he does and doesn't know.
I have to say, I feel sorry for his wife, Sarah Vine. She's a respectable male columnist, Daily Mail columnist.
Oh, I thought you meant a male columnist.
No, yes, for a moment there you had us all confused. Yes.
Dear. Quite respectable, but no, she's being screwed over by her own husband.
moving back to the ERG meeting, Silly Sailor mentions that it costs 10 grand to join the ERG, and a lot of MPs are sympathetic but not members. So the fact that you've got 80 paid members attending is kind of a big deal.
Does anyone know why it would cost 10 grand to join a political club?
I don't know off the
Asking
top
a
of my head.
member of the Carnarvon Club.
I suppose it's their way of stopping trolling.
It's just a strange. It's a very strange way of going about things.
Yes, this is clearly Mog's side gig. Is that what you're saying?
Well, no, I mean,
No, I think this is Mog's
it's just
main
a
gig.
very strange thing. You have to kind of provide us with a deposit of £10,000. I just find that a very odd thing to ask of any politician.
To be fair, no one really knows what the ERG is doing. It could actually just be a massive front for a Jacob Rees-Mogg campaign, and
Investment
they would
fund,
need.
yes.
You could need 80 to 100 grand just to sort of mount a leadership challenge.
This is also quite possible, given that because when I was in the Liberalists UK, we were looking at how much.
Are you gone now?
Well, well, I've stepped down from a management role, but
you missed.
that sort of thing. But
See, when the Liberalists rejected my offer for forming a national Liberal federation, I just gave up.
Trust you not so obvious to steal Boris Johnson's thunder here by announcing that you're no longer with the Liberalists.
Yes, this is it's a wave of resignations. That's what it is. No.
I won't follow.
But basically, we were looking at how much it costs just to do, like, because it's government, everything costs more anyway. So, like the UKIP rebranding campaign cost £22 million.
And they reverted back, if I'm correct.
If I recall, yes. Academic Agent says Liberalists should have ejected the leftists earlier. I have continuously warned them. Sure, but we're not going off on the Liberalist tangent. No, we're staying on topic.
Yes, and we all need to keep in mind, of course, what the Academic Agent calls a leftist.
Yes, anyone left of the right-hand side.
Leftist centre.
I thought anyone left of Augusto Pinochet.
Yeah, that's about it. That's a pretty good working definition of the Academic Agent's worldview.
Let me see. Chris Green has tweeted out, I've handed in my resignation as PPS. Brexit must mean Brexit. And he's had a reply from Simon Hart saying, you're a PPS. It's not relevant. Nobody gives a fuck apart from me, obviously. I mean, it's very professional, isn't it?
It's just a mess.
It just seems, but people were asking after you in the in Academic Agent stream, Britisher, because they're curious that if a leadership challenge was to go forward, what your thoughts are on who would step up. Because currently we were going through the odds between all the candidates and that sort of thing. So the argument, of course, that the Academic Agent making that the person who's the favourite never wins. That Rees-Mogg is fourth and very well placed. That he could do
Theresa
something.
May won. She was the favourite.
She.
I don't know. Curry is saying that this mirrors Thatcher's downfall, and it is going to be dreadful for the Tories.
Potentially, there are a lot of people saying that they're looking at a split to another party. That Labour will definitely capitalise on this if the Tories start to fall apart.
Well, see, the problem is the Tories are falling apart, and I said that Labour ought to have called a vote of no, put forward a motion of no confidence in the government, but they didn't. Although they made it sound as if they might.
I think potentially, though, that the Labour people, because obviously they work off the concept as well that everything is terrible under the Tories and that the Tories are incapable. And I think they know that if they just let this play out a little bit longer, then it will play even more into their hands because it will look even worse.
But they are desperate for power and desperate for general election. And say on Friday when most MPs go home, springing a vote of no confidence would probably secure them both of the things that they want.
Can I ask something very basic here?
Sure.
Because when it comes to, people have basically said this is not a good deal. It's not true Brexit. But people were throwing around all sorts of models, the Switzerland model, the Norwegian model, EFTA, the EEA, Canada plus plus. And then you look at all these things that were debated in time and you say, okay, fine, can anybody tell me in what way what was proposed actually complies or conforms with any of those models, even partially?
Yeah.
And that is where I think this always tends to kind of defeat itself, because it is so labyrinthine. It's incredibly difficult to get your head around this stuff. Particularly then when we don't have all the information, because not all the stuff that was decided was published. I mean,
No.
I don't know if you've heard since some of the background of what happened, that effectively all the ministers were told to hand in their mobile phones because they didn't want any leaks. But then, once Theresa May had effectively bullied this thing through, they weren't handed back their mobile phones.
Oh, what?
Yes, they weren't handed back their mobile phones for some time, so that Theresa May and Downing Street could basically organize their response and get their story out before anybody else could respond. Because when we were on that live stream with Academic Agent, one of the things that struck us all was the uniformity of the press response.
Yeah.
Well, that was because they only had one source.
Yeah.
Nobody else had been able to get a word out.
And AA has just pointed out as well that they weren't allowed to go home. They couldn't even get a taxi.
Well, that was another one, that basically they were told, but basically there was almost like a pamphlet that was handed out at the beginning. And they were told that anybody who would be resigning would have to surrender their ministerial Jaguar immediately.
And would have
they
to
even provided the number of a local taxi agency.
Oh my god!
It was
So to say that there was a little bit of pressure being brought to bear is an understatement.
It's basically being held hostage.
This is not the way in which you really kind of make friends.
No.
So yeah, it's a very, very strange way this was being done.
I am aware that for a lot of our viewers who won't be familiar that much with British politics, you may not be aware of what this Brexit deal actually encompassed. So I've brought up the at a glance Brexit plan agreed at Chequers, just so people are aware, just in case it slid people by. So this was basically, the UK will maintain a common rule book for all goods with the EU, including agricultural products after Brexit. So this means that Parliament oversees the UK's trade policy and will have the ability to choose to diverge from EU rules. However, this would have consequences. So the idea being that we would mirror the rules on trade and goods and services.
We would have the right to say no, but if we said no, we would bring the whole house of cards crashing down.
Yes, absolutely. So that's why people are upset with that. Joint jurisdiction, a joint institutional framework established to interpret UK-EU agreements done by UK courts and in the EU by EU courts. Decisions by UK courts would involve due regard paid to EU case law in areas where the UK was applying the common rule book mentioned above. So we would not be in control of our own laws again, because that would have come with consequences. And that's obviously an issue. A facilitated customs arrangement about borders. So the borders between the UK and the EU being treated as combined customs territory. So we would be applying domestic tariffs and trade policies for goods intended for the UK, but charge EU tariffs for stuff heading into the EU. In other words, tariffs wouldn't work, that we wouldn't have control of what we were tariffing out.
Well, yes, but one has got two problems with that. The first one is practicality. So you would have to have a paper trail. You would have to oversee where exactly every good that came through a port of yours went.
Yes,
Because
and
you can't have it happening that something eventually ends up in Europe and they don't get their tariff. So
No.
everything has to then be very closely supervised. The second one, and this is perhaps even the bigger problem here, that right now the European Union is already bringing a case against us. Because
yes,
they say that we haven't, that we let certain Chinese goods flood in, which cost European governments a considerable amount of money. I mean, billions.
Mm.
Now, that might be being brought for political reasons in order to undermine our credibility. That's I wouldn't put it past them. But you have to consider that when we at the same time are telling them, you should leave it to us to basically collect your tariffs for you.
I've just seen that we've had another resignation. Connor Burns,
At this point,
PPS to Foreign Secretary.
I was talking about that earlier.
Boris Johnson.
Oh, I missed that one. Yeah. Sorry. I guess the name I thought looked different.
There's Chris Green and Connor Burns.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes. But the other thing is, like, the reason that the tariffs thing was instituted is because of Northern Ireland, right? They don't want a hard Irish border, but it just seems so convoluted anyway. And again, regulatory and very much the CCTV nation again, but this time we'll look at all your records and everything you send, like to what extent this affects. Like, I have family in Belgium, like, to what extent anyway. The agreement says it would end free movement. However, a mobility framework would allow UK and EU citizens to travel through each other's territories and apply for study and work. So,
and Theresa May in a BBC interview refused to basically say whether or not there might nonetheless be special rights afforded to EU citizens.
Yes, because I don't understand the idea of, like, it's so half-assed. Like, that's all I'm getting anyway. Like, trying to appease the Remainer crowd, which is not working. These proposals
anyway, to be fair.
This is the final part of it, because that's just the glance. These proposals represent a precise and responsible approach to the final stage of the negotiations, the government says. According to the government, the plan gives the UK an independent trade policy with the ability to set its own non-EU tariffs and to reach separate trade deals, even though it wouldn't be able to really, because the EU would just say no.
The EU has already basically said
no to some of these things.
To the single market stuff.
Yeah, but what is interesting in this is, even if you would forget that we would still need to negotiate this with the European Union, this would only be a negotiating position. This isn't the final deal. But if you even just look at this position, do you actually think that this would basically stand up on its own? If you would try and put this into practice, would it actually work? Or is it inherently flawed? Because to me, that's why the week that was, when I was preparing this, I was pretty much getting to the point of pulling my hairs out. How on earth do you get a grip of this? Because from whatever side you try and grip it, it's just as if it's some kind of slippery fish that just slips right out of your grasp again. Because you look at it and you just go, this would in and of itself not work. Because you can already see that there are inherent contradictions in this thing. That at one moment, we would be in charge of our own courts. Our own courts would be in charge of the law, but at the same time, we would share certain rules, and we would be collecting tariffs for the European Union. And you would sort of be saying to them, just trust us. You don't need any recourse to your own laws. It's only your money we're collecting for you.
Yes.
And you just think, no, this would never work. And that's why sort of the more I looked at it, the more I was beginning to feel, was it just that, that the various sides still couldn't really agree while they were there at Chequers. So in the end, they just cobbled together something of which they wouldn't at least not scratch each other's eyeballs out, but of which all of them really agreed that it would never work. But it doesn't matter that it doesn't work, because the primary duty they had is to bring out something, because this was the last chance saloon. They could not go to this meeting and not come out with a decision. They've done that once before. So
yes, and they're approaching that deadline. It crawls ever closer.
They needed to produce something this time, so that they could actually present something to the European Union next time round. Now, in this case, it makes no sense whatsoever. So many things seem to be diametrically opposed to each other. The more you think this through, that you sort of feel, I'm sorry, but this looks like a house of cards where there are one or two supporting cards at the bottom missing. And therefore, it's almost as if we are bringing forward a knowingly flawed proposal simply because we can't really agree on anything. And even that seems to have been enough to basically have people come out of the woodwork saying this is a sellout.
You say something, Callum?
Just seeing that the pound is down, sharp.
Oh, right.
Today.
When Boris left, wasn't it?
Well,
yeah, when Boris left, the pound fell a whole pence. Look at it.
That is because not knowing who your government is going to be in two weeks' time is seen as the prime business opportunity, as academic agents put it.
Yeah, the pound fell by over 1%.
Goodness
so
me.
the pound is falling in preparation for all these exports we're going to be making in order to make us even more competitive.
Competitive, yes. The other thing I was going to say.
He must hate me right now, mustn't he?
I put it in the side chat. If someone wants to look into it, I put it in the side chat. Boris's letter.
Yes.
May's letter to Boris.
So most of us have been through Boris's letter, but let me just present to everyone, and here we go. This is the letter from Theresa May to Boris, although weirdly it is signed the Right Honourable Boris Johnson for some reason. Dear Boris, thank you for your letter relinquishing the office of Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs. I am sorry and a little surprised to receive it after the productive discussions we had at Chequers on Friday and a comprehensive and detailed proposal which we agreed as a cabinet. Is a proposal which will honour the result of the referendum and the commitments we made in our general election manifesto to leave the single market and the customs union. It will mean that we take back control of our borders, our laws and our money, ending freedom of movement, jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice in the UK, and ending the days of sending vast sums to the European Union. We will be able to spend that money on our priorities instead, such as the £20 billion increase we have announced for the NHS budget, which means that we will soon be spending an extra just about 400 million a week on the NHS. As I outlined at Chequers, the agreement we reached requires the full collective support of Her Majesty's government. During the EU referendum campaign, collective responsibility on EU policy was temporarily suspended. As we developed our policy on Brexit, I have allowed Cabinet colleagues considerable latitude to express their individual views, but the agreement we reached on Friday marked the point where that is no longer the case, and if you are not able to provide the support we need to secure this deal, it is right that you should step down. As you do so, I would like to place on record my appreciation of the blah, 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 and the passion and blah, blah, as we leave the European Union. Yours ever. And there we go.
Well, can I just point out that this she was always hailed as a person of incredible competence, something I doubted while she was at the Home Office because she was utterly incompetent. But perhaps this is almost the quintessential example of her competence, that she ends up sending a letter to Boris Johnson that seems to be signed by Boris Johnson. Well, it's signed by her, but under it is written "The Right Honourable Boris Johnson" as an explanation of the signature.
Yes.
Yes. There is a certain magic to that, isn't there?
It's just somewhat. You just go, oh, a copy paste job there, isn't it? This is just. Oh, people are still talking about the pound and saying black lesbian for prime minister. But there we go.
I do think that it's a Tory leadership challenge is not imminent but inevitable, and that it is also possible, of course, that Corbyn will try and collapse the government on Friday, and 80 ERG, I could easily see the ERG collapsing the government.
Well, apparently
because Rees-Mogg himself has explained that Labour cannot actually get into power because they do not have enough MPs.
Apparently there is a vote coming up, which again, it's some kind of Euro vote. I forget what it is.
Oh, is this the one that I had? I don't know what it is.
But apparently
the
the Remainers. This was one where the Remainers were threatening to rebel. So now they suddenly have to question their own tactics, because if they rebel, should the Brexiteers rebel, that would then really have the capacity of bringing down the government.
According to the Telegraph, Boris Johnson has left the government up a creek without a paddle. And I would say that corroborates with what you've just said. What the fuck? Looks like Jeremy Hunt is the new Foreign Secretary.
What?
As he's gone into Downing Street. He's just had his Jaguar pulled up and has gone into number 10.
What the fuck is going on?
Well, at least it would get him out of bloody health.
Now,
I'm not even English, but I
what
don't
we may
like
be
Jeremy.
seeing now is a similar thing to what we saw with Jeremy Corbyn. Do you remember there was for a time when no one in his own parliamentary party wanted to work with him?
Oh, I remember that.
I
think that was right after the EU referendum.
He was so stretched for having anybody to appoint that he actually had to end up appointing people to several portfolios at the same time.
Yes, wasn't Diane Abbott at one
So his
point?
shadow cabinet were in charge. Each one of his members of the shadow cabinet were effectively in charge of about 3 or 4 portfolios.
Wasn't the situation at one point that Diane Abbott was Shadow Home Secretary, Shadow Justice Secretary, Shadow Minister for Women and Equalities, and Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury?
Yes,
It's accountable, that.
It's once again reflective of her overall competency.
What?
Obviously, if Diane Abbott Diane Abbott obviously is better at multitasking due to her natural proclivity as a woman as well. So it would make sense that she would be assigned multiple things. As long as you don't ask her to count how many things that she's doing at once.
What could go wrong?
Evan Kusik in chat says Diane does cast a long shadow, to be fair.
Long and wide.
But we were talking about in the event of the leadership challenge, who would take over. A lot of people are saying Rees-Mogg. Some people are saying Sajid Javid. He's currently the favourite, statistically, followed by Gove, followed by other and then Mogg. But people have been talking about sort of people who come in from the side. So AA is quite keen on. Can you remember who? Yeah, James Cleverly.
And there's also Dominic Raab.
Yes, who has come out of nowhere. Yes, he's the new Brexit secretary.
And yep, it is looking like Hunt is the new Foreign Secretary.
So that would leave the NHS without a secretary.
Which would mean that someone else would have to be appointed Health Secretary.
So what are your thoughts, Britisher?
Well, what can one say? I mean, right now she may just be rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. Because
I quite like that analogy. That's good.
Because right now, I mean, okay, she's handing out ministries here and there. I mean, the idea that you move someone from being secretary of the NHS to being foreign secretary, you think this is a strange leap. I mean, why not just appoint someone else foreign secretary and leave the person in charge of the
remember
NHS
that-
where he is?
Remember that Jeremy Hunt is not a doctor, is not medically minded at all,
And is not
and is
liked.
actually and is not liked, and is actually a business owner.
But I think, isn't he someone who's been quite unflinchingly loyal toward her?
Yes, Jeremy Hunt is one of those really loyal ministers who's risen in popularity, and he might go for leadership as well.
I can't see him winning a leadership election, seriously.
Also, Ruth Davidson has lambasted Boris Johnson defending Theresa May.
Academic Asia.
Although the less said about Ruth Davidson, the better.
Academic
Well, I
Asia.
mean,
has
many
brought-
people in England, one must point out, it is people in England, like always holding her up as a potential leadership candidate. I've never thought she would be.
Please, no. She can lead Scotland, but not the UK.
AA has brought some, a poll to us, some stats. They're saying one poll on Twitter with nearly 1,500 votes, 83% in favour of MOG. That sort of thing.
That's probably why he won't be allowed
Yes.
to become a leadership candidate.
But that says quite a lot about the Twitter bubble, doesn't it?
Yeah, I was going to say, Twitter is
It's not just the Twitter bubble.
Well, yes, but one must be careful that one doesn't try to basically take results one gets on social media and basically from that derive that's what the relevant populace thinks.
But that's what the national pollsters do, Britisher. It's just much easier.
Yes, I mean, we all know, when it comes to political involvement that, for example, pensioners and whatever are overly represented. How many of them have Twitter accounts?
It's very true.
question.
I think this is also why the pollsters often get things wrong.
I mean, particularly when it comes to the Conservatives. I mean, what will be their average party member age?
Also true, yeah. I mean, it's a bit skewed across, but obviously across politics, it's typically older.
But yes, but on social media, this accounts for both the left and the right. I think we have got a tendency to have people who are more to the right representing the right, and people who are more to the left representing the left on social media.
Do you not think, though, that MOG would represent the will of the older voters anyway, though?
Yes, but I just cannot. I still, to this day, cannot see him as particularly saleable to the overall populace.
I don't know. You let him talk and he talks sense. I think, like, that's the.
Well, that's the primary thing. I think, again, it's like the reason why Corbyn is in the position he is today is because he is a principled man. And a lot of people...
Not, though.
No, but a lot of people vote for him because he puts on the facade
Of being a principled
of
man.
being a principled man.
Yes,
And-
I've heard
and
that
that's-
time and time again. Yes.
And that's why they like him. They don't even necessarily know what most of his policies are.
Yes.
Or what the effects of them are going to be, but they see him as a principled man, and
But
that's
there
why
is,
they
there
like
is also that famous debate between Nixon and Kennedy. The people who heard it on the radio thought Nixon had won. The people who watched on television were all heavily convinced that Kennedy had won.
People did that with
I'm sorry, I think that Jacob Rees-Mogg is a bit of a Nixon.
Really?
Not in terms of being tricky dicky, but in terms of not being saleable to the public. The image doesn't really come across very well.
What, the
Yes,
aristocrat?
He is very
He's not
intelligent.
an aristocrat, though.
He is,
No,
he is
I mean,
very
he is-
intelligent, and he does seem to know about what he speaks. But
Yeah.
you look at it and you just think, this is a very hard sell. Try and sell this to the public. And you sort of feel there is a bit of a problem there. So I think, I mean, when it comes to Boris Johnson, I mean, since
Sorry, just before
with Iran, sorry, go ahead.
just before we move on from that, though, have you not seen? I mean, I'm sure, assuming you have, Mog's outings on things like Daily Politics, where he basically demolishes the presenter on like the religious freedom issue and that sort of thing. where
Well,
I think he's very
I think
TV friendly.
One always has to be careful with demolishes and wrecked.
Well,
we've seen too many of those videos. On
Okay,
YouTube.
so no, because I watched the entire program, right, and he's solid throughout the whole thing, and he's not massively, like, he's aggressive, but in a very
Yes, he's
not
unflappable.
in a
He's
yes.
unflappable. He always remains calm. He is not someone prone to be taken by emotion. It's
Other than
quite
you,
clear.
so
He is definitely a person who you would see as someone competent who can handle things.
so as far go on.
Leaders are more than just competent people who can handle things. They tend to have an image. They tend to, whether we like it or not, they tend to try to be likable.
Are you arguing that he's just not populist enough, effectively?
Well, to a certain extent, yes. If you look at someone like Boris Johnson, he does a lot to kind of make himself saleable.
Really? Because from someone from my perspective, I find Mog much more saleable than
Boris
Bojo.
Johnson puts on. A lot of what Boris Johnson does is an act.
Oh yes, 100%.
You can't help but feel he puts it on because he knows
so that he can.
This is kind of liked by the populace. Now,
it's so that he can
recently, he has got that kind of Iran thing attached to his ankle. He still has never been able to shake. At least, this time around, after a bit of thinking over the weekend, he then came round to thinking, okay, I think I better resign. Whether that was actually his own thought or whether that was because David Davis resigned is another matter. But at least he's kind of saved himself from losing his support base there. But I would still see him as more than likely the one with the best chance. There would also be David Davis, who...
David Davis looks beaten in every interview I've seen, or his interview that I saw with him post letter.
Well, you can sort of say, does he look beaten or does he look at the end of his tether? You have to understand that this is the chap who I think 7 times had to threaten to resign in order to get the government to give him a position from which he could actually work.
He did actually say that he was drafting this letter for a month.
Oh, it's undoubtedly the case. He must have rewritten it. But as such, people will have seen him as the person kind of fighting Britain's corner, which never stands you in bad stead when it comes to standing for a leadership election.
Kind of. Again, you have to consider. I suppose I think you're partially right. There you go.
But I think a great many things depend on tactics. So, for example, if the other side provide a unity candidate, and on the right side, on the Brexiteer side, you've got David Davis, Boris Johnson, Jacob Rees-Mogg, or one or two others, then they split the vote between themselves. And it then looks as if the other side is the towering favourite. And the thing is that people always rally around the one that looks about as though he is to win, because the Tory will be desperate to kind of give an impression of unity.
You can jump in, Callum.
Apparently not. No, I just.
No, sorry. Right. Yes, I was. Sorry, I was just looking at something.
Yes. No. Right. Yes.
Jeremy Hunt is definitely number 10, but separate to that, you were talking about splitting votes. Now, when you talk about splitting votes, you are talking about the Tory party, parliamentary party, and not the party membership. Because just to make sure, because if it does get to the membership, Mog will cakewalk it.
Well, yes, but this is just it. When it comes to the membership, but remember, last time round, it never came to the membership.
Well, last time, I think part of the reason it didn't come to the membership is that either Leadsom sabotaged herself or was in the process of sabotaging herself and May offered her a deal. But remember on the last stream, not so that we were talking about if Theresa May was a plant or not. I have a feeling once Gove was rejected, it was basically Theresa May's a home run for Theresa May, and she forced Leadsom to resign or to pull out to make it easier for her to become Prime Minister.
Yes, but by that time she was already a runaway favourite.
Exactly. So my thought is that if
you have
Mogg manages to
various
survive,
who all split one vote, and then you have somebody else who looks as though he or she is the towering favourite, then that's what happens.
well, you need to think about who is standing.
Well, yes, but that very much depends on how the factions go about this. So if I were on the Jacob Rees-Mogg, Boris Johnson side, I would very much advise these people to get together and start working out how they want to approach it, as opposed to me, I want to be Prime Minister.
What, like Gove did?
Well, yes, but I think we can by now accept that Gove is very much out of the running.
So it could then be that the European Research Group, I actually, part of me still cannot see Mogg actually
being Northern Ireland secretary for several years to come.
I do like Mogg has been because whenever he's asked the leadership question, he always comes back with the "I'm too busy at home," and I'm always a backbencher. I've always been a backbencher, and I will never be anything more than a backbencher. And it's amazing the number of conspiracy theories that abound about he's biding his time, he's positioning himself well, and that sort of thing. If he's just telling the truth, and he would never even propose himself for a leadership candidate, he would never take it on. He's already stated today that he would not take a ministerial position if it was offered him. So excluding Mogg,
that would mean he would be offered a ministerial position by Theresa May under these conditions. And I mean, why would he take a ministerial position under these present conditions if the conditions aren't sufficient for David Davis and Boris Johnson?
No, well, say David Davis challenged and became Prime Minister and then offered him a ministerial position. I think that's what he's getting at.
Well, as I say, strictly speaking, he could just be talking about the present government.
Yeah, also true. It's tricky to know.
I could imagine the European Research Group backing Johnson. Johnson might secure the support of Rees-Mogg to then secure the support of the ERG against probably Javid.
You forgive me if I'm laughing.
I think any other candidates would fall away.
Well, like Mogg as Brexit minister, potentially, that sort of thing.
I see Mogg as Chancellor.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Or certainly a Treasury position.
Right.
Because Mogg is an economist and an investor.
Yeah. Britisher, were you laughing at Sajid Javid because you were imagining Humpty Dumpty and eggs again?
No. I was laughing at the academic agent announcing quite tersely that Anna Soubry needs to be purged.
Bless him. He just wants to helicopter everyone.
Yes, I've got the feeling if we ever put that man in charge, he will remain the sole surviving member of the population on the island.
Well, there's a very good reason why he's not in charge. Because
him and his pilots.
Yes, his army of pilots, and the Britisher tied to a post and made to craft amusing anecdotes for him on command. Perhaps to the ring of a bell.
Well, that he would end up shooting those pilots himself. Once he no longer needs the useful idiots, he will get rid of them.
Well, there wouldn't be any guns, but the Harry Channel has pointed out, don't give AA a wrench or he'll purge them all.
Billy Saylor wants him for PM.
I don't know whether or not academic agent as Prime Minister. None of these people are doing their jobs well enough. I'm all the positions. All the ministers are AA.
Yes, I would see him changing the position from being that of Prime Minister to Lord Protector.
Yes, there is a point at which the helicopters will pay for themselves. It's like... He's,
Down in the Senate.
AA chiming in there, and
Yeah.
the helicopter emojis everywhere. But no,
Yes, he would actually start quoting French. L'état, c'est moi.
indeed,
No doubt, the academic agent will soon, fill us in what that means.
of course. People say God Emperor. It's God Emperor academic agent. I thought it's God Emperor Trump meeting the Lord Protector.
That's not so far off from the Sun King, who was the gentleman who said that French line.
I see. The speaking. When I saw Boris had resigned today, I for a start I had a bit more of a panic moment because I thought he'd withdrawn from politics entirely, and I thought, "Good grief, we've lost Boris Johnson." I mean, completely. That was funny. AA says, "I won't dignify French." I assume that means by learning it, he won't learn it. He won't dignify the French. But
at least he recognises it.
But there you go. Dominic says, "Close Parliament. Let spontaneous order sort it out." And Silly Sailor says, "If the academic agent speaks French, I am unsubscribing."
L'agent académique.
Bless. But there you go. So moving on, if this meeting with the ERG doesn't go forward, why do you think? Callum has left us for a moment. I did have a question I wanted to ask him about why he thinks this will all go down on Friday, but we'll mention that in a minute. Captain Bedrook says we should trebuchet Theresa May.
Yes, I just saw that too.
Um,
that would actually be quite. I could imagine you could make a tourist attraction out of that. Just kind of fire her lengthwise from a bridge into the Thames.
Indeed. What do we think of war plan?
In Edinburgh, don't they always at 1:00 fire a gun or something like that? We could at 1:00 always in London fire Theresa May into the Thames.
I mean, she's quite unharmed. It's just hurting a lot.
Same again tomorrow.
You've earned. Thanks to you, Britisher. I've earned a thumbs down from Curious Mammal, who says, "You've earned your thumbs down, you damned French swine." And there you go. You get plus 50 points trebucheting Theresa May if you hit a Frenchman with her. Or perhaps aim her at Brussels. AA is running a Twitter vote at the moment on who to be Prime Minister. This is an interesting thing. In the wake of this whole thing, what do we think is going to happen in regards to UKIP and the consequences of something like War Plan Purple?
Well, it's quite obvious. What is going to happen is there's going to be a coup of UKIP. Owen Jones and his friends are going to take it over, and then he is going to become the next Prime Minister.
Oh, I was going to say that there'll probably be about a 5% swing from the Conservatives to UKIP.
Yeah.
You reckon?
That'll be against UKIP surge,
Attorney General has gone to number 10 as well.
Paul Nuttall will personally execute Theresa May.
That'll get votes, to be fair.
Why, Callum, welcome back. Why do you think Labour will trigger its a vote of no confidence or motion for on Friday as opposed to, say, tomorrow?
Well, are you aware that most MPs go back to their constituencies on a Friday?
Right.
And many of them hold their surgeries on a Friday.
Well, yes, but wouldn't this be the kind of Friday where they all would kind of suspect that from being the case?
I'm suspecting.
Might just stay put.
I don't know what it is. I remember in 1979, Margaret Thatcher kept a very, very careful eye on the number of opposition MPs or government MPs in Parliament at the time. And it is possible that if on Friday morning, I would imagine Jeremy Corbyn will be keeping as many, if not all, Labour MPs in Parliament at the time. So it's possible that he might spring a vote on Friday. It's unlikely since, I mean, the parliamentary arithmetic is not quite there. And it is also possible that he would have to rely on the ERG to actually topple May.
Mm. Binary Surfer says they reckon that UKIP's membership will explode, double their membership overnight. Interestingly, the Labour folks got hurt much worse by the UKIP swing last time than the Tories. Which is true.
About double.
I don't know about double. This is just opinions, isn't it, man?
Wrong.
Base Liz says, does the UK have a rule that says only natural born Brits can be PM? Not that I'm aware of.
So.
No, I've not heard of that either.
It may
anyone can.
Anyone can.
Because
Have they changed
Andrew
the
Bonar
no
Law was
Catholic
Canadian.
Hmm.
They had a rule that you couldn't be a Catholic.
Yes, Catholic emancipation happened in the early 19th century.
Yes.
And Jews were able to stand from 1858.
Well, yeah, hence Disraeli. But
Disraeli was a Christian.
I didn't realize that. That the Catholic thing had been dropped.
No, I didn't know that either. Right. So, excuse me, just doing a little research in the background there. So we've established that you don't think Mog is popular enough to.
Well, Cameron
So
Hickman says Boris Johnson was born in the United States, so technically he could be Prime Minister of Britain and then stand for the
presidency
in while still in office.
Prime Minister President Boris Johnson, you say?
Yes.
It sounds. All he needs to do is take over the military and form a junta.
Or would he become the Prime President?
Well, no, he'll become the Prime Minister, President, Admiral General Boris Johnson.
Generalissimo, I think is the word you're looking for.
You are failing to recognise my reference to Sacha Baron Cohen's The Dictator.
I was going to say, is he going to become Dr. Al-Hajj, Boris Johnson, Dada, Lord of all the beasts of the Lord of all the beasts of land and fishes of the sea, and conqueror of the British Empire in Africa and Uganda in particular, and King of Scots.
Yeah, Uganda in particular, of course.
Look, Boris Johnson, if given the opportunity, probably would take over an African country.
Yeah, but which one? There's so many to choose from.
And I think Uganda, maybe Burundi.
See him standing there in a kilt with his own, custom-made tartan as King of Scotland.
Lewis Taylor says, when we achieve Brexit and we've left Europe, we should replace California with the UK. So we'll just slot it in there, right, in the back, at the bottom. It'd certainly be warmer, although we're probably a bit smaller than California. And Action Henke says, clearly Boris Johnson would retake Rhodesia, of course. And Base Liz says, yes, please replace California.
Would he
Jeremy Hunt's Foreign Secretary
deport any student who had asked for the taking down of Cecil Rhodes' statue to New Rhodesia?
Jeremy Hunt is now confirmed.
Yep, confirmed Foreign Secretary.
As Foreign Secretary?
From number 10.
Hashtag reshuffle.
And I think Jeremy Wright, Attorney General, will be made Health Secretary, and then someone else will come in as Attorney General.
Are we a fan of Jeremy Wright?
Jeremy Wright? No, because he's just like a random minor cabinet minister or something. I don't know what the role of the Attorney General is here.
Well, the rule appears to be that you have to be called Jeremy.
I assume so. The well, it's like was it if you want to run the SNP, you need to be named after a fish.
Yes.
And that sort of thing.
Dear God, a woman wore a T-shirt in the House of Commons.
What?
Yeah, I just saw a picture of a woman wearing a T-shirt in the House of Commons.
What is this madness? This is not very British, right? More T-shirts get the T-shirts.
No, I mean, women should be wearing petticoats in the House of Commons.
Indeed, T-shirts get the helicopter.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. 1 second. I'm just going to invite East Liz on to join us. Just for the banter, and because AA has decided he wants to snipe from the sidelines. So I'm just going to link that in there. There we are. Jeremy Wright is an extreme Europhile, says the Apollo TD. I mean, I really have no idea as to Jeremy Wright's.
Who just snorted a line of cocaine there?
That was Callum.
Alan.
Oh.
No, I was just saying, fuck.
For Europhilia.
Yeah,
Yeah.
any Europhiles in any position in the government is clearly a problem.
It is
Got
certainly for the
yeah.
government that we need to do now. I just like if you just hash this out. Like there are times when a strong position on something just really will help, and it doesn't matter because you like. I think that if we were still in the EU, if we were all strongly in for the EU, and we were hammering them in the EU Parliament, one, it would really massively show up all the EU's flaws. Secondly, it would give us a massive bargaining chip and loads of influence in there, etc., etc., etc. But because we're going out, we need to do exactly the opposite. I think both approaches could have success. Now, I do think that leaving is the correct decision to make because the European experiment is not working. But the fact of the matter is that you need to have a combined focus on this. It's not enough to try and balance the act in the same way.
Well, what was required? What was required after the win by the Leave side was for there to be effectively a war cabinet.
Yes,
The
effectively.
war cabinet to be made up of people from both sides, but both sides committed to actually putting in place, the changes that the people had actually voted for. And I think that goodwill was simply not there. That right from day one was both in terms of the populace, but also in terms of the people. One was pretty much just trying to sabotage it as best one could.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of a sad reflection of our times.
I see.
Well, I mean, I remember one of the first things I saw a few days after the actual referendum result was there was a massive demonstration in London against Brexit. And you thought, well, here they are actually demonstrating against the popular will. And I remember the BBC kind of stopped two old gents who were kind of standing there next to the demonstration going by and asked them what they thought of it. And as it turned out, one had voted for and one had voted, one had voted to leave, one had voted to remain. And, the one who voted to remain was actually the more outspoken one. He said he had voted to remain, but he did not agree with this. And he was quite angry, kind of pointing his finger rather angrily at the crowd as it was going by, saying, this is outrageous. How can they actually be here and openly demonstrate against what is the expressed popular will? And yes, I think the entire country needs to ask itself a few questions here, because we cannot just pin this on the politicians.
No, I don't think we can just post it on the politicians. But then politicians are trying to exert the will of the people, and this is, to be fair, the most divisive vote of all time. In my lifetime, certainly.
Well, just ask yourself, if a country like Switzerland, I mean, they have several referenda a year. If they would behave every single time a referendum result, came to the fore that this or that part didn't like, if they would behave like this, could you imagine what their politics would look like?
Oh, I assume that the reason that they all have a single rifle in their homes would come out very quickly. Good evening, Based Liz.
Hello, good to see you guys.
So, from an American perspective, what questions and things have you noticed?
I'm not sure what do you mean.
So,
as far as
your
what questions have I noticed?
Well, sorry, you're observing this from the position of an American.
Yes.
What's your take, basically? What are your thoughts? How insane does this look? What do you know?
It looks very insane. I mean, just judging on what May has proposed for Brexit, it's absolutely ridiculous. And I would hope that the populace would stand up and say, no, this is not okay. I know AA suggested maybe she's a plant, and I said I've wondered from the start whether this is intentional on her behalf. The fact that when she called for an election just after getting in before Brexit, and everybody said, "Oh, this is good. It's to get the majority of people on her side," but then immediately released that whatever that document was that she did, that just completely, she basically threw the election. From the start, it looked like she was setting herself up to fail as far as Brexit was concerned. So that's been my perspective on it as an outsider.
Can I briefly break the tension and going off on a very brief tangent?
Of course.
I've just seen something completely different. This is John Cleese in a bikini on the desks. Kind of change. But a Russian officer has admitted that the forces in eastern Ukraine are Russian military, and that this is technically an invasion. He's publicly admitted that Kremlin backed, not just backed, but actually sent forces into Ukraine.
Well, yes, but he's having a nervous breakdown. He's a known alcoholic. We found drugs in his flat. Blah, 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 blah. I mean,
And he'll quietly disappear in the next 20 minutes.
Have they found, or he'll either disappear, or have they found him with a canister of the nerve agent used in Salisbury yet? That's the question.
Mysterious circumstances.
May, I genuinely think May.
Oh, he's facing a 10-year jail sentence
Grief.
So, of course he is.
for shooting a conscript.
That's for shooting
Although
a conscript.
He's also been told that his sentence might be waived, but he might be sent as a commando into Syria.
I wanted to shoot many recruits when I was in training in the RAF, but we didn't go through with it, sadly.
That's a shame.
Who posted that about the Ukraine, by the way?
The Times of London.
The Times of London. There you go. That's for chat. I've just had word as well that basically Fox has just resigned.
What?
As well?
The fuck?
Exciting.
Yeah, when I get excited, I turn into.
So he is now going to spend more time with his special friend in Sri Lanka. Glad
this is
one or two
something that-
people at least understood that joke.
Dear.
This is something that's very unusual to me as an outsider. I hear people, or I've heard of people threatening to resign over things, but it's not something you really see in the U.S., at least not in my experience, where people do actually resign,
I mean,
other than over scandal.
you have to remember that they're resigning from. Some of them are resigning proper. Most of them are resigning from cabinet positions. So it's not the same as throwing in the towel and going home. But also, it's not something that typically happens very often here either. As I think we were noting, this hasn't happened really for about 30 years, which is why it's somewhat unprecedented.
Well, in the government, it happened in the back. It happened in the opposition last year.
And in all fairness, one would expect someone in America to be quite used to seeing people who are cabinet members falling like bowling pins.
Nope. Matt Hancock has been promoted to health and social care. He's gone from digital, culture, media, and sport to health.
That makes perfect sense. Digital media. He should be able to put a spin on the failing NHS any day now. Better than Fox, better than Hunt even. Sorry.
Yes. Where are you getting this Fox resignation thing from? Fox is defense secretary, but resigned in 2011, and people are pointing to that. But there's no rumor of him resigning yet.
I'm only getting most of my information from chat, right? So you have to forgive
Take that with a pinch of salt.
The occasional misinformation getting through, but there we go. I've just got
AA is saying it. Fox has resigned.
Yes, and I was getting some other stuff. The naturally, I am sticking to Laura Kuensenberg's Kuensenberg's.
Kuensenberg is strange because she's Scottish, born in Italy, of I think German or Czech.
Kuensenberg would be
family.
Yeah.
But she grew up not far away in Glasgow.
Mm. But I'm just keeping her page on refresh effectively because she seems to be the one who.
Yeah, I've got her on mobile notifications. Also, I'm keeping track of the Guardian.
Check Guido. Apparently,
Yes.
If they're resigning but not resigning, so what, they're stepping down
Sorry,
from.
may I explain?
yeah, go on.
Please do.
What it is every member of the British Cabinet is a member of Parliament. They are either an MP in the House of Commons or a Lord in the House of Lords. Often, an MP will be promoted to the position of a Secretary of State, the head of a department, and then they will have a spokesman in the Commons and a spokesman in the Lords. And then they'll have other junior ministers taking over specific areas of the department. So a perfect example would be the Foreign Secretary was, up until today, Boris Johnson. He then had Chris Green as his parliamentary private secretary, a spokesman in the Commons in his absence. Then, I can't remember the name, but a Lord would sit in the House of Lords and do Foreign Office questions from the other chamber. And then there'd be other ministers for counter-terrorism, minister for Middle East, minister for Africa, minister for the Americas. I think there's even a China minister, and they would deal with those specific areas. And so all of those have to be either an MP or a Lord. So when they resign, they cease to be that position, but they revert to just being an MP or a Lord. All it really means is they give up that extra job and revert to their MP's salary.
There is a huge, I suppose, like it's a common thread that runs through many public services in the UK. In that, in government jobs, there are a number of, we called them in the military, secondary duties that you would take on if you're in sort of that area and you want to advance. You don't just do your job; you take on extra responsibilities, and then so when even like in the NHS. If you're a doctor who's in charge of a department, you take on extra functions outside of that, and then you use that to advance your career. You see it a lot in the training environment in the military, because going and doing a stint as a training officer counts towards like this extra stuff. It's just very common. I don't know why, but it's just something in British practice. And it can be quite important duties as well. So you get things like you have things like the Royal Air Force liaison officer, who is basically someone who is who sits on when you're deployed abroad. You volunteer, and you're the person who basically is running things through other countries. You're acting as like a one person or a team or embassy for that military base. And that's entirely voluntary. So there's a common thread. So it can be an important job. So all the secretary positions and that sort of thing within the UK government are sort of like that, but sort of not, which is why you get cabinet reshuffles as well, because they are voluntary in a sense. They do sometimes come with extra benefits, I believe, and that sort of thing. So let me see. Dr. Fox is an actual doctor, says Academic Agent, and there are a lot of counterclaims that Fox will be Health Secretary.
No, Hancock's been made Health Secretary.
Yeah, Hancock has been made officially.
That does leave a vacancy at the Culture Department.
Jeremy Wright has actually replaced Hancock at Media.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I thought he might. That explains why they. So that means there's a vacancy at the Attorney General's office.
Let me see.
Which I worked out is the Solicitor General. That is, I think, the political representative of solicitors, or something.
as you do. Yeah. Hey, welcome, Academic Agent.
Oh,
You finished sniping from the sidelines.
Yeah, this is more of a base. This is more of a base Liz style. It's more of a base Liz style kind of NPC escort mission. Yeah, I just remember that I saw Jeremy Hunt.
So what you're saying is you're our escort for the evening.
I see. Well, will you be wearing lingerie? Will you be wearing John Cleese lingerie and lying on a desk for us?
No, but I just remembered that I listened to an interview that Andrew Neil did with Jeremy Hunt as a Spectator special about a week ago, and he kept on reiterating during that interview, the health secretary will be my last job in politics.
That's gone well for him, hasn't it?
And a week later he accepts this. And I think we're down to the reason I wanted to mention that is that I think effectively we are down to careerists now in the current cabinet. Anyone who's not resigning is looking out for their own career, and this is where Gove in particular is starting to stick out as being a man with no principles at all. Why hasn't he resigned? Why has he not? Why is he still in the cabinet? Why did he go out and make that media appearance he didn't need to yesterday? That's the question I've got. So, yeah. Does anyone have any thoughts on that particular question? These people who are making these careerist moves, are they actually making the wrong move?
How's Gove gonna get like his career forward now, staying in this cabinet?
Well, this is a question. Like, is this for these people who have not gone? That is Hammond, that is Hunt, that is Gove. Let's say May falls. Is their career basically over from this moment that they did? But
hang on. I mean, if you are a Brexiteer, if you're a right winger and you hitch yourself to this wagon, then yes. But if you're Hammond, if you're Hunt, I mean, they are not of the persuasion of Boris Johnson and David Davis. So why should they resign?
Because nobody in their own party is with them, other than a very select group of people who are increasingly isolated.
I cannot see them paying a political price for this. I mean, as far as they're concerned, I think it will just basically be seen as this was May's baby. I cannot see anybody who is of the different political persuasion. Basically, I cannot see the Remainers in any way having to pay a price for this.
Well, I
can see the Brexiteers, someone like Gove, who then basically suddenly attaches himself to this. I can see them as having to pay a heavy price.
We're seeing it's difficult because politicians spend their entire political careers looking for maybe one decision that maybe it's like a gambling for them. They want to avoid as many 50-50s as possible. They'll only take strong positions if they believe that it's going to benefit them. Certainly in most places. But Brexit's been a bit of a funny one because it is so split down the middle of the population. So the question is how many of them are going to make tactical moves based on their careers? How many of them are going to be sort of frozen because they don't feel they can make a career move because they know that if they come down on the wrong side of this, it will end them?
Well, I was thinking more in terms of do you remember Britisher? You're probably old enough to remember this. Do you remember when Portillo lost his seat in the Great Blair wave?
Yes.
And Michael Portillo was the defense secretary. He was one of the biggest people in that government. Somebody of the stature of a Gove or a Hammond, he lost his seat. And this is what I'm thinking about. Will there not be a political price to pay at the ballot box? If a very strong UKIP opposition came in Philip Hammond's home seat, he could just be out that way in an actual general election. This is what I'm ultimately talking about. Are they over as a political force? Because the people aren't going to forget this.
The problem that the populace faces really is that it's still always being held to ransom when it comes to these elections, because it isn't that you really decide, oh well, I don't like this particular Tory candidate, so I'm not going to vote for him, because in the back of the neck of every single Tory voter lies the fear that if he doesn't vote Tory, Labour will get in.
This is also true.
That is kind of the big flaw within our political system.
Do you see if things really go from bad to worse? I mean, they're already pretty bad. That and they can't move fast enough, do you see Jeremy Corbyn moving in and taking over the country?
Only if he's a
Effectively.
strong Brexiteer, but I can't imagine him doing that with the Labour Party.
Do you think they're in a position to do so? Because so if the general election was held next week or tomorrow, how do we think it would go?
I think they would still need something like, is it more than 50 seats to get a majority?
You believe so? Yes.
So that's pretty much, the equivalent of every single Scottish seat. They would need to add to their total.
Since the SNP became a force up in Scotland, it has become mathematically impossible for Labour to win.
Oh, are you saying Callum?
I'm just saying, yes, there's about 59 seats in Scotland, and yes, because the SNP hold the majority of them, it is impossible for Labour to form a government, but perfectly easy for the Conservatives to. Since they were able to form a majority with just one Scottish seat.
So there would have to be something significant that would have to happen in order for Jeremy Corbyn to be able to form a government.
Like
you would have to have a kind of enormous. You would have to have them see some kind of surge in England. You would have to see the Lib Dems possibly also have a very strong surge, and then be able to go into coalition with the Labour Party.
You'd also have to see the Labour Party embrace something that typically is causing the Scots to vote SNP. So I don't know, devolve more EU, devolve interactions with the EU to Scotland, something that drastic.
That's no, please.
It'd be insane. There you go, Nicola Sturgeon, Brexit Secretary. What? And that side of things.
God, don't even joke about that.
I don't know. I see a great wave of if May stays in, I see a great wave of populism taking over the country, and it one way or the other, it's over for that section of the Tories, as it is over for the Blairite Labour people. It's gone. That political moment has completely evaporated.
Once again, and I know you say, AA, that the centre-left vote has collapsed, but theoretically, because we saw things in the media surrounding a new centrist-style party of all the old Blairites, etc., and the £50 million or whatever that they had to get started, etc. Do you see them coming in and trying to capitalise on people who don't want to vote UKIP, but feel like utterly lost in this whole political mess right now?
They could emerge and they could get votes, but they might as well stick their lot in with the Lib Dems at this point, because that's their
I actually think that any new centrist party would, like the SDP, go into an alliance and then merge with the Lib Dems. Under whomever got more seats.
Yeah, under the name of whoever got more seats, do you say?
Yes.
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised.
Which would probably, given the Lib Dems' reputation, probably be the other party.
What do we think about? Do you think that Farage saying he may as well come back is going to have a significant impact on the way UKIP is viewed and that sort of thing as well? Because I mean, they've already had sort of a bit more of the populist surge, as it were, from obviously signing Sargon and company, and having them join up and so on. Did we actually get the numbers on how many people actually ended up joining UKIP in the end of that? Because there was obviously the claim that there was 10,000 people that then got called 616 confirmed, and then I've heard nothing else. So do we know? And did we find anything? We can't find whether or not Fox has done anything, did we?
I don't think he has.
No.
Yeah, I've not seen anything. I've looked and I can't see anything for Liam Fox.
Vicious rumours.
Looks like Geoffrey Cox could be the new Attorney General.
Regarding the surge in UKIP, I wonder, the original estimate of 10,000, I wonder how many of those could have been people outside the UK joining, just kind of an excitement following Sargon, so to speak, or just to boost the numbers, and then UKIP saying, all these people, they're not even British citizens.
Yeah, I wonder if they said no, thank you, but feel free to make a campaign donation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I know that some people did respond to Sargon's video saying, I'm not even in the UK, but I just joined. And I thought, I don't think they're going to let you join.
Well, you don't have to be a member of Britain to join. It's just about whether or not. I think you have to be a British member in order to
Jeff
vote.
Cox is a leaver,
Mm.
replacing Jeremy Wright, who is a Europhile.
Mm.
The Guardian has got an article saying 1,000 new members. That was on the 2nd of July. They
Okay.
Yeah, I think it was 1,000 members in a week.
Then again, they refer to Sargon as far right, despite the fact that he's going in the helicopter.
far right takeover, and then on the right it's got, do lesbians have better sex than straight women? So Guardian.
Obviously.
A lovely degenerate website.
So there's a potential case for May strengthening her position. She's done what some have urged her to do for months: face down David Davis and Johnson. They've walked, so refreshing the cabinet, but not too much. Tying in Brexiteers with ambition, Gove and Raab, so has space for inevitable compromise with EU, and Eurosceptics are weak because they won't unite. Case for disaster on the other side. To the outside world, it looks like a fiasco. Dozens of MPs still hate the compromise, which matters with no majority, adamant they won't let plan stand. Johnson, although damaged, still has huge recognition and can cause trouble if he wants to.
I mean, I think that even if he doesn't win, Johnson really should do a full Heseltine and announce a leadership battle. He really should.
Could Leadsom be next? Dear God, no.
No. Leadsom and Gove seem pretty loyal.
Yeah.
So, you see, I this is in the realm of conspiracy speculation, but I think that Gove did a little deal back when he knifed Boris.
I agree. I thought so too at the time. Yeah.
A deal with whom?
Satan.
Because it couldn't have been with May, because May rejected him from the cabinet, and he was only brought back in after the reshuffle.
Don't forget, she did bring him back in. He was put on the naughty step for a while.
No, he was brought back in after she lost the general election.
Yeah. So when she was at her peak strength,
I'm going to look up who Gove's predecessor was.
Yo,
I don't know. Maybe he lost his.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. Just
Always forget to turn that off.
God, Americans always chiming in when they're not wanted.
Oh no, he's preceded by Andrea Leadsom
She was, yeah.
as Environment Secretary, right after the general election, and that's because Leadsom replaced the leader of the House, David Liddington, who replaced Damien Greedon.
Is just out of curiosity, is Johnson actually that popular with the actual parliamentary body? So the MPs, is he actually popular with the MPs? Because I didn't think he was.
You see, the thing is that Johnson is unpopular with the same people to whom Mogg is unpalatable. Effectively, the wets in the party are, I mean, they're disgusting. They are really disgusting. They're at odds with not only their own party membership and their voters, but also the principles of what Toryism is meant to be about. So yeah, there are lots of people who've said things like, "I would resign if Boris Johnson was ever made the leader," or
Well, again, you've got to assess how much of that's wet blanket talk anyway, as well.
But you've got to understand that a lot of the grandees in the Tory party are the same people who did Thatcher in back in the day. They're still around. Heseltine's still around.
Yes.
He's still, they're all sitting in the House of Lords, and they do have power.
I see. I don't think Boris either. I don't think he's great as a leadership candidate either, because really he is a Remainer who backed Leave because it was politically in his favour to do so. I think he planned on the Brexit campaign to side with the Leavers so that he seemed like a strong personality and a candidate, and then expected to lose, but he could have lost with grace and diplomacy, and it would have cemented him in the public's mind as someone with character or more character than his silly persona, and someone who was potentially a leader. Like, that's what I thought his plan was.
I think the best way of understanding Boris is that at heart he is still a journalist, and journalists have to follow. They have to follow where the winds are, and he's done that his whole career. He just follows the political winds. I mean, it's notable that Boris, he timed
Johnson has finally been seen. He's finally left Carlton Gardens.
Where is he?
He's wandering around London now. He's finally left his official residence after being hollowed up in there since this morning.
When you say wandering, it just makes him sound like he's in a daze, like not really knowing where he is, just sort of stumbling about.
I'm sure he doesn't. He's probably thinking, now that I've left, should I try and become Prime Minister?
But it's just notable that it wasn't Boris who led; it was Davis who did it first, and then Boris was like, "Right, now, no," he sniffed. Now it's safe to do it, and then he made his move the following day, and that's very much in his character, I think.
Mm.
So what do you think is the likelihood of Theresa May resigning? And if she...
0.
Yeah,
Resigning,
so
0%.
No, she would have to be forced out.
Yeah.
There's no way she would resign.
That's just because of the nature. I can't remember exactly how it's described. Perhaps Callum could explain it better than me. But there's like a good reason why the process wouldn't allow her to resign necessarily, even if she wanted to.
If she resigned as Prime Minister specifically but remained Conservative leader, then she would hand the seals of office to the Queen. The Queen would then offer them to Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn would fail, and she'd have to offer them back to Theresa May. If, however, Theresa May lost the Tory leadership or resigned the Tory leadership but remained Prime Minister, that wouldn't affect who was Prime Minister until either she won the leadership again or someone else beat her and then became Prime Minister.
Harry, go on.
I just wanted to say that it's been pointed out that Hunt voted Remain, Hammond voted Remain, Javid voted Remain, May voted Remain, and Guido Fawkes has said government of the Remainers, by Remainers, for the Remainers.
It does seem like almost the Prime Minister is shamelessly taking advantage of this and is turning this into a Remain government.
Well, is that what she's doing? Circling the wagons.
Who was it that said?
How many Brexiteers would she actually be able to find who would be willing to join her right now?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously Dominic Raab seems to be one of them, but how many Brexiteers right now are there, with their hand up in the air going, me, I want to join the cabinet?
To be fair, Dominic Raab replaced thingamajig David Davis this morning, and the world has changed since this morning, just as it's changed since last night. And the other thing I was going to say about the coup by Remainers was
actually being the factor involved in all this isn't anything that has happened today. It all goes back to the Chequers Agreement, and basically, whereas David Davis and Boris Johnson and now several minor figures have left because of said agreement, Dominic Raab has now had a vacancy offered to him due to that agreement, and despite the agreement has taken it.
Well, I still think that, going back to that, I do think that he might have accepted the role because he didn't know that anyone else was going to resign. And then also, it's probably important to consider that I don't know who it was that said it, but the government may have agreed with the European Union that if no deal is found, or that Article 50 is decided to be voted down, that the UK government has secured continued membership of the EU on current terms. It was Gerard Barton, head of UKIP, has been confirmed that if UK doesn't quite leave the EU, then he'll keep his seat at the EU Parliament.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think it was at the last meeting of the European Council that she basically signed a paper that basically said, if we weren't leaving, then the contingency was that we would maintain our European MEPs. Yes.
And what I was going to say was that also marries up now with the essentially coup by Remainers at the top of the current cabinet. Now, obviously, there's the political reality of no Leaver would actually want to join the cabinet at the moment, but it just looks to me now as if Theresa May is realising she has to cut her losses and abandon the Brexiteers completely. And is taking a directly Remain stance.
See, what I think is that Theresa May is quite thick. That she's not, like, I've always maintained that she's just not a very intelligent person. And in the world of chess, they always talk about, like, you know, a good player knows when they're beaten and resigns, but a bad player plays out the end game to the bitter end, even though it's obvious they've lost. And I think Theresa May is a character like this. Like, even though her time is ultimately up, she is still going to fight her out to the bitterest end.
And will damage the country even further by doing that.
Even if it means damaging the country, even if it means destroying the Tory party, she will do it. So, I could be wrong, but I suspect British Show is right that she will not resign.
I don't think she'll resign.
She won't resign.
So what would it take to have? I know you talked earlier about her being removed forcibly. What does that entail, or what would it take for that to happen?
So technically, 150 Tory MPs have to vote of no confidence against her. But realistically, if it reached triple figures, that is, if it was, let's say, 102 rather than 150, she effectively could not govern with that number of people against her in her own party, because they just vote down everything she tried to do, and she'd have to rely on Labour votes to get things through. However, there are precedents for this in British history. For example, I mentioned the Corn Laws earlier on. Very famously, Peel had to rely on Whig votes and went against his own party in pushing through the Corn Laws. So it has happened in the past. And the Corn Laws is, I mean, if you want to talk about things as big as Brexit, the Corn Laws are up there. So
I still think that Mogg last Monday compared May to Peel. However, I actually think under the current situations, it's possible that someone like Mogg, for the good of the country, would ruin their own career to split the Tory party. Because part of me feels like maybe the Conservatives need to be destroyed for this to work.
I mean,
because part of me also feels that the grandees like Heseltine might actually be working with senior cabinet ministers.
Oh yeah, I mean, Heseltine's got his fingers all over this stuff, but
But the thing is, where's Lawson and Tebbit?
Well, John Major's that, but see, the thing is that Heseltine and Major have more actual power in the party than Tebbit, and they're much more marginal figures these days.
Is that because of Cameron then?
Cameron basically
purged the dries.
Not only did he purge it, don't forget his final act as Prime Minister was to literally stuff the Lords full of his own cronies.
True.
Which was his last laugh. But my honest reading of this is that I mean, we've been watching Mogg for a while now, and it does not seem to be in the man's character. It really doesn't.
I just want to share a quick Twitter meme with you, which has just graced my feed. I thought that was quite funny. Dear God.
Yes, I've been very much enjoying the Mogg laser eyes stuff that high Tories are pushing. I will mention I did my own poll to see.
Oh yes, how's that going?
Well, Mogg he started out with 86%. It's now almost at 300, and he's slipped at 81%, with Boris at 10%, Javid at 6%, and Ether at just 3%. So, he's very much the people's choice. wherever you run this poll, it
Someone's
seems
saying
like
John Redwood.
I did note that somebody said John Redwood.
Wait, John Redwood's still an MP. He could still run.
Nah.
I mean, I know he ran in
Does-
'95,
Does
but
John Redwood know the Welsh anthem yet?
I think John Redwood is long done with frontline politics, so doubt it will be him. Oh, all
Yeah.
right. So my escort mission has to end now here, folks. So I'm just going to say my goodbyes.
Well, take care, AA. It's a pleasure having you on. Appreciate it.
Cheers, guys.
Take care.
Okay, well, with the academic agent bowing out gracefully, I think I might just do the same thing and sit down in front of the telly and see if Liam Fox has resigned yet.
Well, if that's the case, well, we could end with something a little less dramatic. If you don't mind sticking around for 10 minutes,
Okay.
that sort of thing, where we basically talk in front of Liz about our least favorite Americanisms. That's the general. That was a general gist. No, I put Americanisms in the title, but that was that.
It would be interesting to see if you want an American reaction to it. It would be interesting to hear what things about Americans most annoy British people.
Why do you say on accident? Why?
Wait, did I say on accident?
You don't say it. Americans say it, and it's sneaking over here.
Oh, I don't understand. Oh,
No.
are you saying it's bad grammar?
It's awful grammar.
It's the
Damn
word.
It should be by
can I
accident.
point out this thing about saying bad grammar or awful grammar?
Poor grammar, I think, would be
No,
better
no,
grammar.
none of it. It is all of that is getting away from the correct statement, which is to say it's grammatically incorrect. Bad grammar is not actually grammatically correct.
Schooled by a Scotsman.
That makes sense.
That's
And I
what
see
it is.
RC in the chat where he says, "I could care less." Yes, that is a horrible thing. I wish no one would say it. It's terrible.
Why
Makes
do
no
Americans?
sense.
Why do Americans do the math?
That annoys me.
Well, why do British people say maths plural?
Because it's
Math is a subject.
mathematics.
Subject.
Mathematics is not a plural. It's
Yes.
an English corruption of the Greek word mathematica.
Look, we invented the language. Get
Well, more
It's fair to
correctly, the
say
language
so.
evolved from a bastardization of Latin, Norman French, Anglo-Saxon, and Celtic.
Yes, and it was us who did it.
Yes.
It's
And
a
very
sad language.
Then we've also got that wonderful expression, American as apple pie.
Yes.
Is this where you
not
contest the
sure.
origin of apple pie?
Yes, I mean, are the Americans really trying to claim the invention of apple pie there?
I think it came from Johnny Appleseed because he is considered one of the people who helped tame the West, so to speak.
But what you're saying is this is a leading American intellectual who went by the name of Appleseed.
No, he's not an intellectual. He was an explorer. He was basically a pioneer.
Yes.
You're not familiar with Johnny Appleseed?
No.
No, and that's not his. That's not his
No,
real
we-
name. No,
we
that was a
may
nickname
have-
that
we
he was
may
given.
Fish-based politicians, but we stay away from fruit-based intellectuals.
Oh dear.
He
What-
wasn't an intellectual.
I love that chat is chiming in now. Why the hell do you lot call it the World Series when only you Yanks are the ones that play
I was
it?
going to say this. What is the
That
baseball
goes
and the World
back- that
Series?
goes back to the newspaper who actually sponsored the whole thing. It was The World.
Ah, I
So
see.
it's actually called the World Series, but it's actually named after the newspaper who once sponsored it. Of course, they kept it because they liked the suggestion that it was the global series, so to speak. But it initially took its name from a newspaper that was known as The World.
See, I do not understand how you know so much about so many things and you don't know who Johnny Appleseed is.
It's because he's a brain in a jar. He's
As I said,
lived.
he's one of your leading intellectuals.
I see.
Again, oh my goodness!
The
No.
Harry Channel says he
No,
actually
I
wore
think
it.
I think you failed to see. I think you failed to get the gag, Liz.
We do.
Yes,
Anyway,
I'm
yeah,
missing
please.
something. I can tell that you're trying to say something here, but it's like he was not an intellectual.
Maybe what I'm implying is compared to most Americans.
Okay.
Dot. Okay. Now,
He's got AC, yes.
He was known for his bravery and for a lot of things. He had a lot of wonderful qualities.
But not his intelligence. Yes. He wore a tin pot as a hat.
To be honest, he may have been a genius. Given what he survived and what he accomplished, he probably was very intelligent. It's just that's not what he's known for. So, yes, I do get the joke now that it's been explained.
What is with the Americans' bizarre obsession with the removal of U and S's? So in words like colour and that sort of thing. Do we know why that is?
I believe that was Webster or whoever the American who did the first American dictionary. He decided to cut down on what he considered to be extraneous letters within words to make them easier to spell and only have the letters that you actually heard. Which that's at least what I've heard. It doesn't.
It was actually, as you say, it was a simplification.
You're not trying to save ink.
Or as I would call it, a bastardization.
Bastardization. Where do we walk? Oh, we walk on pavements, but where are they? They're at the side, and we walk on them. They are sidewalks, and they are next to the blacktop, which is the thing which is black on top, except when it's not. There you go. The Dominic says, Liz, we want our 13 colonies back.
You can get with them.
And Silly Sailor says, make America Great Britain again.
Well, again, it's like, the king tried that. He said, no, you can't leave. And we said, make us stay.
I remember
and that's
Boris
what Britain
Johnson
needs to do right now. Europe is saying you can't leave, and Britain needs to say, okay, make us stay.
And I remember Boris Johnson standing for, or someone put forward Boris Johnson as a presidential candidate under the party, Make America Great Britain Again party. And their candidate was Alexander Boris de Pfeffel Johnson. Boris Johnson was not contacted by the BBC regarding it.
I just had some news in saying Mogg is not challenging May, and the ERG has called against putting in votes of no confidence in May to Graham Brady, chair of the 1922 committee. This is from William Ragg, MP, who is Rees Mogg's ally.
Well, you see, there was that interesting. There was one sort of interesting piece that the BBC once had. It just sort of struck me when Liz was sort of saying, "Well, just make us do it then." And that is that when there's always this talk about the Irish border.
Yes,
there was some suggestion that the British government could actually take the position of saying, well, we're just not going to put up a border in Ireland. So even if we need a border, we're just not going to do it. If you want to, you do so, but we're not going to put up a border.
Yes.
Because, if you actually calculate the size of the Northern Irish economy and, compare it to some, town in England, you suddenly realize it's actually not that big, and therefore it would be possible, given that, if you're actually talking about smuggling and whatever, it's only a percentage of the overall economy. It's not the total of the GDP of Northern Ireland. So they could simply just say, we don't care, we're not going to do it. And so even if they would have to have a fixed border with Ireland, they could simply just dig in their heels and just go, no, we're not going to put up a border.
So you're telling the Mexicans they have to pay for it?
So, well, no, I mean, effectively, if Europe would want a fixed border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, well, then they could put up their own. And that would mean they would be the ones who would then have to protect it, because they would be the ones coming under attack from the separatists. Whereas the British could simply say, just shrug and just go, we don't care. Anything, any cross-border movement of goods that would then go on to the British mainland would still have to go through, the port and whatever, and therefore we might have a possibility of controlling these things. And other than that, the Irish government could always simply come to some kind of agreement with us to control what goes in and out of the ports. But as such, when it comes to whatever the differences in tariffs between Northern Ireland and Ireland would be, we just don't care. And I mean, that would be quite a terrifying gambit to play. And it would be interesting to know whether that was ever attempted with the Europeans. Because I don't know on what program it was on the BBC, but somebody just basically put that forward and said, look, strictly speaking, the UK could play it that way, and what would Europe do about it?
I see a lot. Whenever I think of the Brexit negotiations, particularly with the sort of heavy Remain leaning, I just see them going in and going, oh, it's terribly sorry that we have to do this, but, you know, democracy and all that. But really, like, how should we do this, you know? Rather than coming in and going, we are having this. And
what, should we bend over the table or bend over the barrel?
Yeah, basically. Like, just, there's no... I mean, they don't want to do it. And if they don't want to do it, they're not interested in doing it. And even, you know, because you see someone like myself, for instance, who is a Remain and reformer. But now that democracy is happening, and particularly with the way, I mean, they must see the way the EU is going. You know, particularly with things like the copyright bills and stuff like that. Although May, having put through the Snoopers Charter, may well be in favour of those. You can see, it's obvious. Well, you know, this is the will. We can forge our own path. You need to lean into it. And none of them are leaning into it at all. We are the 5th largest economy.
Sixth
now, yeah.
6th now. In any case, there's a lot of other countries below us. We need to keep going. You know, how big, like, because which are the biggest economies in Europe? Just specifically Europe?
Germany
and France.
Germany, France.
France, Netherlands.
Yeah, and us. Right, so we have the brunt. We're on the UN Security Council. For goodness sake, act like it. That's what I see. You know, you go. We have these people.
We're also the spiritual centre of the Commonwealth.
You wonder, like, again, I hate to bring like leftist politics into this as well, but you wonder whether or not like the progressive consensus has cucked their idea of what it is to be even vaguely nationalistic, to the point where they can no longer sort of lean into the fact that we could even stand our own 2 feet, effectively. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anyway, on that rather ranty note, I think it's probably time to end it for the night. Thank you very much to everyone watching. This is certainly the most viewed and successful stream so far. Time will tell what happens in the next few days and coming weeks. I appreciate it.
And meanwhile, we can rest assured that we've learned something about the leading American intellectual, Mr. Cherry Pip.
Of Cherry Pip, of course, Britisher. I'd like to thank my guest.
What? And his brother, Mr. Toodle Pip.
I'd like to thank my guests, Based Liz, who you can find at EC Sheets on Twitter. Callum Ferguson at CW__Ferguson on Twitter. To Will, who you can find at either the Liberalists UK or on Twitter as, you'll have to pronounce it for me,
Harrian_Gladiv.
Harrian_Gladiv, and the Britisher, who I'm sure most of you know at the Britisher Twee, or Twy, TWI. But yes, thank you very much, and thank you very much for watching. We will see you next time. Take care.
Toodle Pip.